back. WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. The sign out front should have told you. We are staying calm. We're staying local. All of you know we've done tons and tons of talks about mayoral candidates, the future of the city, the pandemic. We've done education. We've done race. We've done crime and policing. But my legacy and heritage, as you can tell from the little cartoon bird on the hat, is the sports thing. And we're gonna get back into the old Baltimore sports thing. And this is literally the first sort of kind of sports conversation, other than Luke, that we've had here since COVID began. I had Marty Conway on probably about a week before COVID hit. And Marty, I think when we left, you and I were discussing football free agency, right? There was the NFL draft, and there was, hey, it's opening day. Did the Orioles put their tickets on sale yet? And who are they playing? And can you buy an opening day ticket? And we fell off the cliff. And full disclosure for everybody out there, other than me following your tweets and whatever, you and I haven't jumped on the phone. And I was preparing a mayoral campaign that everybody can read about now at WNST.net. And I've been watching you sort of in anguish, right, for everybody in your industry as well as the music industry, all of these industries that have literally been shuttered, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, look, I know there's lots of headlines about owners and players and bubbles in Orlando and Vegas and all these places where we're going to be playing without fans and doing all these sorts of things. But for me, the essence of this game, number one, is about fans, the ability of people to come in and enjoy this. But number two, the people who make a living, literally, day to day, either full-time or part-time, seasonal, whatever you want to refer to them, who have been left out completely. And yes, in some cases there's stipends going their way, but I just think about the people in front offices, hundreds and hundreds for each team, all these types of people, and then also people who literally in organizations who make a substantial amount of their revenue, annual income, organizations, things like that, from working these games. And I think this is going to be the second or third wave, if there is a wave, of people who are going to be impacted by this throughout the summer and the fall. And I feel really bad. I know a lot of people from, our school, Georgetown, have gone into the baseball industry, the basketball industry. I just don't know if they're going to want to continue to do that 6 months or a year from now, because you can see what really happens when it comes down to it. Owners think about owners, players think about players. And no one really thinks about fans or front office people or people who have to make a living from it. So that's my big concern, anguish. I remember specifically the 94-95 strike and how desperate I was working for the Rangers.
Well, it changed your life, right? It changed the trajectory of your life. You never, ever thought of a life not working in baseball, right?
Yeah, because at that point I thought, well, if they're not really going to consider my interest, then why should I always have to consider their interest and put our lives on hold and do different things like that. So it really catalyzed and moved me into thinking about diversifying a career. And I think that's where a lot of people are now. So we'll see, but I know everybody's been focused on return to play and testing for players and all that, but there are thousands and tens of thousands of people who I think are caught up in this who are silently impacted, and we'll see what happens.
Marty, I want to give everybody your background because people have come in and out of my life and we've drawn new people. Marty Conway is a longtime executive with the Baltimore Orioles and the Texas Rangers, went on to work in Major League Baseball and has been a longtime professor here locally for sports and all sorts of the business of sports at Georgetown, in and out of the corridor and consulting all over the world. And I've seen pictures of him on camels in the Middle East, amongst other things. But I want to bring this thing full circle because one of my friends, I think it was Kevin Grace, who's a great guy, took a swat at EBW, and you sort of spat back a little bit out on Twitter earlier in the week. I just want to give a full picture of this as we sit here on the cusp of a season gone away in the middle of a pandemic where this is my real hair. This is not a hat. This is like what my real hair looks like underneath of the visor. And I go back to 81 when my old man got pissed off and canceled Sporting News. Were you in the baseball industry in 81, or does that predate you? When did you get there?
I got there in '82. I got there in '82 in
So
the commissioner's office.
you saw everyone. Maybe you were a beneficiary of the strike sort of affecting people and how weird that was. But then '94 happened for me in the beginning of my career, and I literally I've done sports for 29 years. I've done sports really for 36 years, going back to the newspaper. I mean, I was at the News American when the Colts left town. I was on the radio when we tried to get a football team. You were around when all the battle drums were for, are the Orioles going to D.C. and will we build them a stadium and how can we do all of this stuff? But I never in my life thought there would be no sports, right? So now we're pushing, about 100 days, going to be at least 150 days without, forget golf or NASCAR and, them running around over in the EPL and over in the Bundesliga and running around with no fans or whatever. I'm talking about in the United States of America as we know it, where there's a going concern on a daily basis, taking phone calls, having heat on situations and stuff. This has been a fascinating case study for me to be 52 years old and having devoted my life to sports, to having sports just sort of shut down. And then on top of that, we're now into this baseball thing where I've called these guys greedy pigs ever since you got out of the industry 26 years ago, right? And because of what happened 26 years ago. And now in the middle of all of this pandemic and all of this stuff, this is the ultimate sort of F you to everyone like you and me. And my last name's Aparicio, and I'm in this country and on this radio station and in all of this because of baseball bringing my family to America in 1965, 66 from baseball and Hofberger and Senators. And Lord knows how my cousin got here legally or illegally. I don't even know, in the 1960s. But now we wake up and they're just going to throw the towel in on a baseball season. I don't know how many wounds baseball wants to self-inflict, right, upon itself. But this is staggering, Marty. And the fact that the Angelos boys are hiding somewhere in their leather boots in Nashville, nobody's saying a word. Manfred stepping out in front of this is a disgrace, right? I mean, literally. And I don't know whether they should pull it off. I don't know whether they should even try to have a season. But if they're going to get together and try to have a season, this was the worst possible outcome, that they would quit on all of it, right?
Yeah, I think. Look, this is if this is the acrimony is as high as it was, and I can recollect in '93 and '94 going into baseball, knowing that that there was the potential for a work stoppage, strike, whatever you want to call it. So I can't. This has been about. This is like a this is like a terrible X-ray, a terrible MRI of the industry, because right now you can see every imperfection of the industry. Look, when the games are stopped in any sport, whether it's in the off season or in between the 4 years of an Olympics, it's an opportunity to focus on the business of the game or the business of the sport, and that's not really what drives interest, right? So we've been in this extended holding period, as you said, 100+ days, where we can't seem to, other than bowling, golf, and NASCAR.
Well, in my personal life, this is a chance to fix your house, right? Like for everybody, right? We've all had an opportunity to breathe. My wife has gotten in the best shape of her life. You know what I mean? I prepared a mayoral run, which may turn into a book or a life or a new brand for me. But all of us have had time to build something if we choose to over the last 3 months. Literally, if we can feed ourselves, we can build something. And look at what they've done. It's staggering, man. It really is.
Yeah, no, they have, like I said, they've exposed the worst parts of the game, and baseball in particular, because they don't have a revenue sharing agreement between players and owners, which just splits up revenues in, a predetermined way. They're still arguing, and there's a ton of acrimony to do it. So as I said, I think it's among the worst time, because this reminds me of August and September of 1994, where there were no games. The players had gone on strike. They were squabbling over this, that, and the other thing, and they had to make the decision to cancel the World Series of all things. Like you don't take your jewel event and just throw it away. Baseball did that. Now they've been recovering every time since then, and they have built up. But the issues in front of them today is that the players now honestly feel that over the last 4, 5, 6 years that they have gotten the worst of any collective bargaining agreement, which for 25 or 30 years, Nestor, they had the strongest position. As long as Marvin Miller was alive and Don Fear then took over, they had always been in the strongest position. The last two regimes leading the players haven't done as well at the bargaining table. Let's be honest. It hasn't worked quite as well for them. It still works very well, but not quite as well. So they have a tremendous amount of animosity, which they're taking into this. And then keep in mind, if they do play baseball this summer, then there's a season next year, and then the collective bargaining agreement ends at the end of the 21 season. So as I described to my friend yesterday, now that they've done so much damage to the financial standing of everybody, next year is going to be played, limping on two limbs. And then they're going to be saying, hey, we need to hoard our chestnuts for 2022 because we don't know if there's going to be a season. So we're looking at literally the next 2.5 years being imperiled in baseball. And that's why I say I feel for people and organizations that are going to have to go through that, because it's going to be a cloud over their head until they could actually get a long-term, collective bargaining agreement, which I just don't see that happening in this current climate. So regardless of whether you're getting a new lease and, fixing a stadium and doing everything, if the game itself isn't in a good position, I just feel terrible for the people who I think will be impacted mostly by it, and we just won't really ever hear their stories. They'll come and go as a professional, and we'll just never learn about it.
Well, and I think we're learning about that when it comes to like people in the music industry or entertainment industry. All of these people, the journalism industry, where the clown who runs the country sort of says everyone's fake news and we're the enemy of the people. And I would just say this for where you are, and I do want to drag some politics into this because you dragged politics into it back in the 1980s when you have a franchise and you have a football team that leaves, and you're with the baseball team that could leave, that was rumored to leave in this town where Hofberger could never turn a nickel outside of selling beer, right? And Reggie Jackson and Wayne Garland and Bobby Grich and DeCinces, all that free agency stuff had happened before that. And the Colts are playing in a blimp in Indianapolis, right? And Johnny Hughes walking the streets here, and Lenny Moore lost puppy dogs, right? You somehow got the stadium built for the greater good of the city. I don't think there's any question for anybody that was my age, early 20s, that saw what it meant for the Sheraton and the Hyatt and the Harbor and the Aquarium and the Harbor Place and the Ruth's Chris's and the cross streets and everything. That 3.2 million people coming into the city would represent. What it meant for the airport, what it meant for taxi drivers, what it meant for Fells Point, what it meant for Bertha's Mussels, what it meant for what it meant for the tax base, with the money that was left behind, the girls that were tipped at the Baja Beach Club, the bus boys that made money bussing tables, like all of that happens, right? Was around baseball, and you dreamed this dream, you sold this dream. EBW never got to see it. It changed hands. Eli Jacobs. I wrote a book on it. Go read it. It's called The Peter Principles. So, but all of that happened, and now here we are in 2020, where the franchise and the sport has been driven into the ground. Every ounce of blood has been sucked out of the Masson tree. The Washington Nationals have won and had a parade. And the Orioles have a year left on their lease and a 5-year blah, 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 blah that Barker's writing about, that half the stuff Barker's written about over the last 15 years has been inaccurate, so I never know what to believe. I know he's got the pipeline to whatever John Angelos tells him to print. And the whole sport's a rudderless ship. The team's the worst team in the sport. They don't want to play. I mean, that's the dirty little secret. They don't even want to come out and play. They don't even want to talk about whether they want to play. And yet a guy like you would go back 30 years ago and realize what an incredible thing this was for the city that built this condo that I live in, and I really do wonder when they throw the towel in, when these 30 guys and the commissioner who gives zero Fs about Baltimore or Atlanta or any of these municipalities, and when probably, Marty, I don't know, you give me the math, 8 or 12 of these owners don't want to play. And as I've said to Luke, like they're going to play 48 games, they go 14-34, like maybe John Means will go 6-2 or something and win the Cy Young. I don't know. But I don't know what this means for the city, right? And we're going to debate this as Brandon Scott takes over the city and Larry Hogan runs for president and Lord knows whatever else is going to happen here over the next 24 months. But you were a massive part of every brick in that building, and you know all of the whys and wherefores about how all of that happened with Larry Lucchino and EBW. And now as you sit here 30 years later, I really wonder, what does this mean when to your point, the industry is worse than it's ever been. The future's more cloudy than it's ever been. And oh, by the way, the Orioles aren't coming from the position of we have Cal Ripken in a streak and we have a new stadium and we have all the money and we're beating the Blue Jays. That's where we were in 1993-94. We're in a whole different place in 2020, and I'm really wondering what the city looks like in 2030. But what is the Orioles' role in that? Because the Orioles were always a massive, massive, massive part of how people from Pasadena, Westminster, and Bel Air were going to come down to the city and be a part of walking the harbor with their loved ones.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Look, this is no knock against the Ravens or the NFL, but at the end of the day, the way this works is that the football team can generate a lot of emotion in the city and the surrounding area, but the baseball team and the stadium and all that, just because of the nature of the number of games and home stands and all different like that, they can be a piece of the economic engine, like you talked about. You really don't build. You don't build restaurants and gaming and all these things around an NFL stadium that is occupied 10, 12 times a year, and people tend to come and go pretty quick and tailgate and bring their own food and do things like that.
Well, Bob Kraft had that idea, right? I mean, he's the only one that sort of had a really good idea, right?
Yeah, you have to have a special circumstance to do that. But the rhythm of baseball is such that you park and walk and go to restaurants before and bars after, and it's all integrated as a piece of that. So the fact that, and again, I mean, you noted that I sort of took after, somebody on Twitter a little bit about Edward Bennett Williams, because look, what I can tell you is I sat in on any number of conversations, probably some that I was way too young to really understand what was going on. But Ed Williams never, ever, in my presence and from people that I talk to all the time, ever dangled the Washington opportunity in front of anybody connected to Baltimore, whether that was a city person, somebody from the state or stadium authority or anybody. Now, could there have been, and look, there was also at the time no credible options going on in Washington. Nobody had cleared land. No city mayor was saying, here's a piece of it. Washington was really struggling at that time.
Marion Barry, right? I mean, that's the era, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there was no credible place to go. There were basically it came down to two places at the end of the day for the Orioles to move. One was Camden Yards, where they are today, and the other was Port Covington. And I remember specifically Ed Williams coming back to a meeting and saying that he had driven up from D.C., he'd driven around past Port Covington, drove past Camden Yards, and it was a no-brainer. It was a no-brainer where he thought the stadium could go. But at the end of the day, it was the Maryland Stadium Authority's final decision on that. The Orioles had lots of input, clearly. So the idea that Ed Williams was dangling Washington instead of Baltimore, yes, there were a number of stories about that in the media, but there was never a credible a credible example. And the most that he got, the most that Ed Williams got, was the naming of a plaza sort of out in front of there. There's no other really reference to him in the stadium, around there, no real plaque, statue kind of thing where people would say, this is somebody that actually kept the team from not leaving, because all he had said was that he was never going to sign another long-term lease at Memorial Stadium. That's all he said. We went to year-to-year leases after the original lease ended, I think, in the mid-'80s. But that was it. There was no other threat or no other implication that he was moving. So the baseball team, by virtue, and now we can talk about the lease a little bit, and that is they are a real pivot point for anything that occurs within a probably 2-mile radius of that ballpark, because of the number of games, the traffic patterns, opening day, all the other things that sort of go with baseball that football just can't capture. Even if it is a Thursday night game and all of that, there just isn't enough circulation, it's 60 or 70,000 people going 6 or 8 times, presumably, and you're not capturing, even if the Orioles barely draw 1 million, you're still talking about a whole lot more people, spilling out throughout the ballpark and the rest of the city.
But for them to purposely shut down a season, and I'm not saying people are going to flood into the city this year anyway, right? So, and I don't think it's a good idea. I live at the harbor. I walk the harbor with my wife with a mask, sometimes without a mask when there are no people around, right? We've gotten into the flow of this COVID thing of how to stay safe, how to stay 6 feet away, how to be respectful, all of the things the CDC's wanted us to do over the last 100 days. Marty, I'm just going to ask you, and this has no effect on whether you're a vice president of the Texas Rangers or the president of the Orioles, which you would be qualified to be right now. If I owned the team and resurrected from the dead and said, Marty, come run my baseball team, you come down, we run the team. But right now, if you're Indian, what do you think as a citizen, as a sort of a amateur doctor of epidemiology, and where we are with running people into stadiums and knowing the economics of this? Play down the middle for me why John Angelos wants to have a season or doesn't want to have a season. Run me through what this means for the Baltimore Orioles and for us, because if they play or don't play, they were going to stink, right? So that's a fact. Let's just work from straight facts. If they played, they would stink. If they played, they probably wouldn't open the stadium anyway. So therefore, why should I give a rat's ass whether they play? I mean, look, there's a little bit of a point for me to say, don't subject Trey Mancini to that or any of the other players or any of that. Go home. You're not hurting us. Why should we care this year? I would say long term, this thing was built for the Orioles, and that's the part that sort of disgusts me, that there is no disgust about all this. And I think going back to Free the Birds now 14 years later, this was my worst nightmare, Marty. This is why I did Free the Birds, to say there would come a point where there ain't no baseball and no one really cares all that much. I don't sense any outrage one way or another, or any sort of calling that they have to play games on my television this summer. I don't feel that the fans have angst about this, but I think economically we should all have some real angst about this.
Oh, absolutely. Look, this is a hardship, and I'm just being honest about the cash flows of a franchise and all that. If people think that there's a lot of profitability in the game, look, at the end of the day, it can be if you need it or want it to be, but typically it's not, because they're looking at the long-term asset value of the franchise and what it could be worth in 5, 10, or 15 years. The day-to-day cash flows of running it, that goes up and down. But I would say this, and this is the truth, operating the way that they will have to operate this year if they play games is a clear money loser. All you have to do is scan your eyes across the Atlantic to Europe, where almost all of the leagues have gone into hibernation. And why is that? Because playing games without fans not only costs you the revenue that you're not getting from putting people in the ballpark, but the added cost that they're now going to have, which is testing and protocols and security for players and different things of the sort, mainly by doing frequent testing and all sorts of cleaning and things of that sort.
Well, you talk about objectifying the players. They are now literally these bubble people, right? Yeah. Like that, with their families, with the gas station, with walking into Royal Farms, whatever they do, right? Like
right.
if they pick it up, the whole team gets it and the team is shut down. That's where we are now, right?
So it's the lack of revenues plus the additional cost makes it such that playing games without fans is a clear money loser. There can be no more argument about that anymore. We've seen enough leagues shut down over that issue. Having said that, specifically in Baltimore, I think there's greater peril because of, again, the macro and microeconomics that are going on in the area make it such that when you lose relevance, look, when people stop spending habits, and you know this, when you stop spending habits for 3 months or 4 months, I don't care what it is, whether it's movie theaters, restaurants, whatever, that money goes in different directions and it becomes harder for you to get all of those dollars back. Will you get a percentage of it back? Yes, like I said before, people that used to go to a baseball game 3 or 4 times a year now go once or twice. And that starts to show up over time. And so I would be concerned with the 6 or 8 clubs in baseball, and we could name them and probably come up with the same after it's two minutes. who I think are going to be in greater peril for trying to bounce back from this. Look, Mayor Jack Young has said no events in the city through August 31st. So is he saying that even if baseball came back in July, there's no chance the Orioles would play any games at home until September with fans? So I think there's a lot of conditions.
Times 30, right? Literally. And
yeah.
Places now going into COVID, places like Phoenix where they're having a problem, right?
Yeah. So I think that, yes, the surrounding, communities and all the things that go with that are going to suffer. And we talked about the entertainment industry, the hospitality industry, all the things that are connected to that create the kind of second economic wave and third economic wave that I don't know when you go to wake up from hibernation, if you will, that you're able to wake everything up. I think it's impractical to think that everything returns to normal next opening day. I think people's habits, I think their ability to spend, I think their interest in spending changes dramatically, which is why I think they will have to do something pretty dramatic to draw people back to the stadium next year, the year after, because habits will change. Who knows how many season ticket holders they'll continue to lose. So I think that makes for a drastic situation in a place like Baltimore, in a place like Miami, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and a few others to name. So,
well, even if they say it's $5 to come down to the ballpark, would people flood back for $5? You know what I mean? Could they pack a ballpark, even if it was safe? Could they do that? I mean, all of these industries, look at the airlines. I mean, I had a bus company that I used to go to New York for $10. They sent me a thing saying we're only allowing every other seat on the bus, and I'm thinking that's not enough to get me on the bus to New York. And when I get to New York, what the hell's open anyway? So, we all are going to struggle with that, I think, in the coming days and months, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Look, the Orioles tried to do something where they would give tickets away to kids under the age of 9 or 10, and it didn't go over either. So I don't know if $5 or $10 is going to make a difference. What's going to make a difference is people believing that the team, number one, is credible on the field, and number two, they're relevant. No one wants to go to games, whether they're football, basketball, or baseball, when the team isn't relevant and something to talk about. So, maybe this is an opportune time for them to go into hibernation where they really don't have anything on the field. As you said, Trey Mancini and others wouldn't be able to play. So maybe this is a skip year for them. But I think we're going to find out here pretty quick whether players actually want to play and are willing to sign whatever waivers and different things. So my sense is, yes, there will be a season. I think it's going to be a torture season because with 50-some games, that's all the people are going to talk about is how lack of credibility the season has, and they're going to be playing under a cloud probably through October.
If they can figure it out, right? If they can figure it out.
Yes.
Marty Conway is our guest. It's a good little halftime to say thanks to a bunch of our sponsors. Cole Roofing, of course. Billy Cole will be coming back on to talk about all things mayoral and political. Our friends at Planet Fitness getting it together 7 o'clock every night. Make sure you're working out or working in with them. You can certainly work out while you work in, which is what we've been doing all summer long as well. Our friends at Royal Farms filling up with the world-famous fried chicken and the Western fries all summer long, and the Kona Blend coffee, and Chicken Palooza around the corner. I'm going to get a new T-shirt next month. Last but not least, our friends at Taharka. My wife left me the empty key lime pie here. It does smell like key lime pie, and at some point, when Marty Conway and I get together, we'll eat some pistachio ice cream together and listen to Springsteen's The River and the Price You Pay and all that. Marty, I want to just move a direction here from baseball because I think we can go down that river, and you and I will go down that river more, and talking about them fighting and Angelos and the future of the franchise, and as long as the Star Spangled Banner and Fort McHenry's there over the harbor and all that stuff. Let's go to football for a second, and just as a juxtaposition, we've done a half an hour on baseball and Manfred and the Orioles and the history and all that stuff. Then there is what is football doing, right? And I don't. John Harbaugh took a look at the rules and said, "How am I going to keep football players 6 feet apart with masks on?" Good question. There's a lot of money at stake. Oh, okay, so we have to do this. Okay, so there's money. Great. And then Goodell comes out now with the knee and where we are in the country and Kaepernick. And then Bisciotti on Friday, as much as I beat up the Angelos boys, and you can't beat the old man up anymore because he's too miserable and old and gone away that we can never say anything bad about him, even though there was nothing ever good to say. Bisciotti was behind the video, Marty. Like, I've done a little research on this, and I've asked around from the people inside, outside the organization. That video last weekend was Steve's idea. And Steve led the video, and then Ozzy and Eric, and how it was put together. Michelle Andres and her crew do, award-winning work over there. But this is a Zoom thing about feelings and, race and America and football and where we are and working together and how the world works. In the middle of a pandemic where, to your point, there are no games, there are no tickets to sell, Marty, they have a massive thing going on in the NFL that is going to be this problem where COVID's starting to eat up the country again, right? And they have PSLs promised out in a full stadium that they cannot deliver, to your point, whether Jack Young's the mayor, Brandon Scott's the mayor, or I'm the mayor, to say we're going to let 70,000 people run around a stadium in the middle of a pandemic. And Goodell has now come out with the knee thing that's going to piss off every Trumper that threw the towel in on me 2.5 years ago, quite frankly. And they're like pretending they're going to play football in 6 weeks. I think it feels like Willy Wonka to me. I think it's always felt like Willy Wonka. I think it was fun watching the draft and, having cocoa with Roger at 1 a.m. and, all of that, right? But now comes the time where, they're going to open facilities up, and I've watched the way these young men have paraded around on their Instagram without masks in Florida, Lamar Jackson running around diving over sea-doos. I mean, come on. They're going to play 16 football games, and I'm getting on a plane to Houston, and I'm going to fly off to Foxborough in November, and no one's going to spike a positive test that's going to spike a shutdown of the Green Bay Packers in the middle of winter. Marty, I'm really... I don't know what fantasy island they're living on with Hervé Villachez and Ricardo Montalban, with the Corinthian leather, but I'm fascinated that they want me to sit here on WNST AM 1570 and talk like they're going to play football in 8 weeks. I just, it boggles my mind to think that, and then what they're going to do about all of what we've just talked about with baseball. How do we get football players in and out of cities and stadia and airplanes and safety and all of that, and somehow keep 5,000 football players and staffers and trainers and all of that safe from this? I'm hitting the buzzer, and I'm calling the whammy in on this one on Press Your Luck. How about that?
Well, John Harbaugh is right that the protocols that they have, the 60 pages, 70, 80 pages of, guidelines in every sport, in every place, they're impractical. Baseball was the same way, that they weren't going to high five and all these sorts of things that, who's going to police that? As I said at the time, for baseball, they had a 65-page return to play. They can't even do pace of play, right? They can't even enforce that. So how are they going to enforce 65 page of the dues? So yes, I think the NFL perhaps thought that they were going to be the one sport to get away with this because we sort of went into lockdown a month after the Super Bowl.
Well, they're the NFL, right? They're a room full of really, really wealthy, angry white men who've never lost a battle. It's a room full of Peter Angeloses and Bob Krafts and Dan Snyders. Need I say more? Right? Literally, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's really they don't think there's anything that can't be overcome with economics. So,
what's the Rush song? We're only immortal for a limited time.
Yeah, I think the realization, though, is that you're not going to see preseason football in any way, really, shape, or form. They may play some games somewhere in stadiums without people, but at the end of the day, there's really no reason at all, none, zero, to put anyone in a stadium for a preseason game and whatever you want to call it. So I think as they get closer to that, there'll be a realization that, well, perhaps we can play 2 games, and then I think they'll get into that and realize, we'll just do controlled scrimmages, and we'll hope that this Sunday after Labor Day is something that we can do. But look, the governor of Texas, I read, told the universities there, which I think you could also say would extend to the pro teams, don't expect your capacity in your outdoor stadium to be approved above 50%. So I think that's the reality, is that most teams will be looking at, now again, this also implies that people are ready to come back to do something on it, which I don't think they'll be largely ready to do. So, look, that's the reality, is that it's now going to impact, I think, the entire sports calendar for the foreseeable future. And if there is one sport that's poised, if you will, to survive better without fans, it's the NFL, because on a percentage basis, less than 20% of the total revenues in the industry come from fan-induced, type revenues. Now, having said that, teams like the Dallas Cowboys and others, they get a large percentage, perhaps 30% total of their local revenues because they have lots of suites to sell and other types of things. So it's going to vary. But at the end of the day, if you say, is there one sport that can sustain it because of the flow of revenues that come from national TV money, it is the NFL. So to do that. On the Ravens, look, as I saw the video, you saw the video, I thought it was well done. I clearly think that the Ravens are light years ahead of many other organizations in their digital media. I've said that for years now. But I say this, Steve Bisciotti became an owner, and I mean not just, put his money in. He became an owner in the Ray Rice scenario. And I think he realized this is what we didn't do right. And he now has an opportunity literally for a do-over. And instead of allowing the facts to overwhelm him, he has realized I can be the driver of the narrative. And so if that's to sit outside on his deck and patio and create an authentic video, that's the way to do it. So I think he has learned over the last 6 years or so from that incident and how it played out and how the narrative can overwhelm you to saying, no, you know what, I'm going to get in front of it. And it's going to be authentic. It's not going to be something that is scripted and really tightly directed. That's who we are. That's who I want our organization. And then most importantly, he recognizes the community that he works in. And the community that he works and plays in and that draws most of his dollars from is largely an African-American community that's been on its knees for the last 5 years since Freddie Gray and still hasn't recovered from those types of narratives. So I give full credit to them, but I think at the end of the day, if the Ray Rice scenario had not happened the way that it did, I don't think Steve Bisciotti has that video out a week or two ago.
So the Ravens put that video out, and what does this mean for the league financially, business-wise, now that the air is changed for Jerry Jones and for Bob Kraft to wrap themselves in the flag and say there ain't no kneeling in our league, that kneeling's disrespect, all the things that the Anquan Boldens and the Colin Kaepernicks, all that they fought for 3-4 years ago in regard to justice and Black Lives Matter, and I don't want to go as far as say defund the police, but where their stance has been that the NFL now at 80%, and hey, Marty, let's talk about Oklahoma State on Monday, right? I mean, coach wakes up in the morning, puts on a political T-shirt while running around catching fish, and by the time the sun is set, he's not going to have his job anymore.
Yeah, no, I think it will vary. Look, in places like Kansas City where they just won, it's not going to matter at all. But I think there will be some other markets that are impacted by this. But I think what the NFL has done here, or the way that it's done to them, I don't think they were proactive in this regard and putting this together. But I think it will, number one, it will signal to their corporate sponsors it's okay to come back in. That while we might have some issues and incidents in the stadium, we're not going to have a broad visible acrimony between players and owners going into the season like we did in 2017 and on the heels of 2016 in that regard. So I think sponsors will see this as an opportunity to say, okay, it's safe for us to go back into the sport or continue into the sport because I think the tensions will be lower. Will there be fan reactions? Of course there will be, but I think those will be less and less over time. So I think financially, the game will probably stay in good shape. Will they lose some fans over this? Will this some season ticket holders and other people say, I'm never going back to a game? Yes, but again, remember, the people who usually speak loudest about things like that are usually not the ticket buyers. People that normally bash the team for anything that they do, whether it's the Orioles, Ravens, or any other team in the country, they generally aren't the customers for the most part. My take has always been, anecdotally, the people who are fans and sponsors, they tend not to say very much. They either go or don't go, but they don't broadcast those opinions throughout social media. So I think ultimately, look, the peril is not having fans or not having as many fans in the stadium will cost them somewhere between 20 and 30% of a team's revenues, potentially. Where that's going to happen, I just think it's going to be varied. It might happen. It might impact the Ravens a lot and the Kansas City Chiefs not much, or the Cowboys a lot. But and I think it'll be varied. And what you'll find is next year, when the time for the salary cap, that's how we'll know how much damage was done financially to teams if they are not able to host fans or not able to fill their stadiums to capacity. We'll know the next time the salary cap comes out. And if it's substantially less, then we'll know what the real impact was.
Well, certainly spiritually for those that were connected to Trump, either financially, in the cases of Shad Khan or Robert Kraft or even Tom Brady's association, and where we are politically going into not just an election, but COVID, whether we're going to play football or not, and whether we're going to wear masks or not. Literally, that's how political this has become in the middle of a pandemic. But more than that, the fact that Roger Goodell said, like Fonzie, we were wrong, right? Like, I don't know that Jerry Jones or Robert Kraft are ever going to say that, and I don't know that politically they can go back to where they were 3 years ago, which was the old David Bowie line, just you shut your mouth, you know what I mean? And that's not going to happen anymore. And for anybody that was offended by that, and I was one of those people to say, just shut your mouth, because people have been telling me shut my mouth for 30 years on the radio and free speech in America, they tried everything they could do to sort of squelch the insurrection with the players, and now that's sort of out in the open, right? And they're going to have to do things a different way, not just because of COVID or the fans or the sponsors. I just think where the culture is and where the country is and what's about to happen in this country in the next 6 months during the election season, it's going to be a fine line for the NFL owners and their spirit to walk in a league where, quite frankly, they haven't hired a whole lot of black executives.
But look, yeah, there's no question about that. For me, 1968. Look, this is the modern day version. It's 1968 with social media. We haven't had the dramatic, assassinations or those sorts of things, but we're sort of in that same type. It took literally 45 years or so for people to literally come around before they honored John Carlos and Tommy Smith, right? And so, what are we? 5 years from Freddie Gray. We're 4 years from Colin Kaepernick. Like it happens. The arc takes such a long time for people to realize, okay, this is going to be part of the change going forward. So I think that the smart owners have probably realized this. They've had counseling and consultants and things to talk about, and that is the direction that this is moving culturally, like you talked about. This is where you're going to need to be positioning yourself, not only for the benefit of your fans and your business, but ultimately this is the direction that it's taking. Like I said, unfortunately, it took 40 years or 45 years for people to recognize two people who stood in protest at the Summer Olympics, because the fallout in 1968 and 69 for those people was way much more than is happening to anybody today. So they didn't have the power of their own voice through social and digital media. So they suffered for years and decades. But I think this is sort of where we are in the sports arc right now, which is you need to come up with a policy on the anthem. It needs to be something that people can recognize, that it's not necessarily protesting the flag, that there's some other things. So you either don't want to be present for it or you want to kneel for it, whatever. It will take some time. Will they lose some fans in this process? Of course they will. Will they retain some of their most valuable fans, particularly younger fans, people that buy Nikes? Of course they will. So I think that's the sort of direction, and that's my reference, I think, to kind of the way that this has gone. At least that's the way we've represented it to students every time we talk about activism in sports and the way this works, that there's a really long arc, and at the end of that arc, people are usually justified in the cause that they spoke about.
Marty, I'm going to get off of sports with you because we've been in the middle of a pandemic, and I was asked by Dave Geller back in April to list my top 10 influential albums. I wound up doing 32 influential albums, with Tunnel of Love being my first Springsteen album, somewhere in the mid-teens, and finishing up with The Rising on June 1st. You got a favorite Springsteen song or album, anything you want to sort of throw in there on the music side, because I know of your affection for Bruce, and I really did like The Price You Pay, a lyrical reference earlier today.
Look, I think for me, it begins and ends with Darkness on the Edge of Town.
Wow.
Bruce talks about that being his samurai record after, what he went through and getting Born to Run out and all that. And I think when you listen to it from beginning to end, from cut one to the end, I think you get a real sense of where he was in his life mentally and physically and everything else as a part of it. So for me, those are the most timeless songs. And I think Darkness on the Edge of Town, when you listen to it, look, I basically watch 4 or 5 things right now. I watch CNBC and I listen to E Street Radio. I kind of limit some of what my things are right now. And that's the place that I can go to when I really want to think about where do you want to be? What about who people are? What do they really stand for? Different things of this sort. So for me, that's the number one album. And look, I would have to take, the title track as the song that I would start with, and then I would build a lot of other things around it if I were building my own sort of fantasy Springsteen concert, fantasy Springsteen album, channel, whatever you want to do. I'd start right there.
Everybody's got a hunger they can't resist. There's so much that you want, you deserve much more than this. But if dreams came true, oh, wouldn't that be nice? But this ain't no dream, we're living out through the night. And girl, you want it, you take it, you pay the price to prove it all night. There it is.
There you go.
I like it. There you go. Exactly. I thought I'd give you a little Bruce, little Bruce juice, little shot of that to start your day. Marty, love you, appreciate you, miss you. I'm wearing my Oriole hat, and if I had my kazoo, I would play the first bars of Something Magic Happens every time you go. Hey, we hope to make the magic happen sometime soon, and I hope to join you at Amici's for a little pane Nestor. It's a new dish I created down there where they take the garlic bread and they put the meatballs with it. How about that? You and me out on the veranda. Al fresco. What do you think?
Awesome. I can't wait for sometimes for this place to all come back up where we can engage the way we used to. We really miss it. So hopefully, yes, sometime in the future.
I smell the marinara, and I'm ready for the beer, and I'm ready for the calamari and the chicken marsala. I was at Amici's the other day. Get down there. Tell Chef Scott we give him some love. Jody, the Penny, everybody down there. Go see him on High Street. I will continue to share my meatballs with you on social media. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. You can find Marty Conway, the good professor of all things sports at Georgetown University, as well as at Marty Conway on Twitter and LinkedIn and parts unknown, anywhere the river goes. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We're keeping calm. We're staying local, and we are always Baltimore positive.